In the previous lesson, we talked about the psychological principles making social engineering effective, the cognitive biases, emotional triggers, and social dynamics attackers exploit to manipulate behavior. Now we want to look at what happens before a social engineering attack begins. The reconnaissance and pretexting is where social engineering becomes targeted and sophisticated rather than generic and obvious. Preparation is the difference between amateur and professional social engineering. Amateur social engineers use generic approaches. They call claiming to be from IT without knowing anything about the organization's actual IT structure. They make requests that don't align with normal business processes. They lack the details that would make their story convincing. Professional social engineers invest hours or days researching their targets before making contact. They understand organizational structure, know names and relationships, reference current projects and initiatives, and use appropriate terminology and communication styles. It's the research here that transforms an obvious attack into a convincing interaction that bypasses skepticism. If you ever hear or see the term OSINT, O-S-I-N-T, OSINT, that's open source intelligence or open source intelligence gathering, but it's open source intelligence that people will gather. The vast majority of reconnaissance uses publicly available information without even requiring hacking. We know social media platforms are treasure troves of intelligence. All of this data on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn is free of charge. Attackers simply collect and analyze. Beyond social media, attackers mine company websites and public records for organizational intelligence. Corporate websites might include organizational charts or staff directories, leadership biographies, press releases about projects and initiatives, contact information for departments, vendor and partner relationships, and detailed information about products and services. Press releases are very valuable. They sometimes announce new hires, promotions, describe major projects and contracts, reveal strategic priorities and initiatives, and provide names and quotes from key personnel. Public records provide additional context. Business registrations, property records, court filings, professional licenses, and regulatory filings are all searchable. Knowing how to contact someone is crucial for social engineering success, and most organizations use predictable email patterns, first name dot last name, and so on at company.com. Attackers will validate these email addresses through various techniques like sending test emails, monitoring bounce backs, using email verification services, and checking if the address is linked to social media profiles. With valid emails, they have direct communication channels to potential victims, and they perform organizational structure mapping. Understanding who reports to who and how departments interact is critical for convincing social engineering. Attackers use LinkedIn connections to map reporting relationships. They piece together hierarchies from press releases and news articles, and they identify gatekeepers like administrative assistants who control access to executives. This organizational intelligence enables attacks like business email compromise, BEC, where the attacker impersonates an executive requesting action from a subordinate. The attack works because the organizational relationship makes the request seem legitimate and appropriate. It also helps attackers identify the right person to target. Rather than approaching random employees, they identify who has the access, authority, or information they need. Sophisticated social engineers also study how targets and organizations communicate. They analyze writing styles from publicly available communications. They note whether the organization uses formal or casual language. They observe how executives sign things. They identify common phrases and terminology. And they use this information to match these communication styles to make their messages feel more authentic, mirroring the actual communication style of the culture. Understanding an organization's technical environment helps attackers craft believable pretexts. They identify what email systems the organization uses, what VPN or remote access solutions are deployed, what software and hardware vendors they work with, and what security tools are publicly visible, and what cloud services they use. This technical intelligence reconnaissance allows attackers to create scenarios aligning with the organization's actual technology. Rather than claiming we need to update your Microsoft credentials when the organization uses Google Workspace, they reference the actual systems in use. Attackers monitor for events and circumstances that create social engineering opportunities, watching for announcements of mergers or acquisitions, leadership changes, system migrations, organizational restructuring, office relocations, or security incidents. These events create confusion, change normal procedures, involve many people communicating about new topics, and make employees expect unusual requests or communications from unfamiliar people. Now, pretexting is often considered an art form. It is creating a false scenario that justifies the attacker's contact and requests. There are several characteristics to effective pretexts. They align with the victim's role and responsibilities. They reference real organizational context and current events. They provide plausible reasons for the request and establish credibility through specific details. They even create what seems like appropriate urgency without obvious artificial pressure. Common pretexts include IT support requesting access to fix problems or perform updates, auditors needing information for compliance reviews, executives requesting assistance with urgent matters, vendors following up on services or contracts, HR conducting surveys or updating records, and colleagues from other departments requesting collaboration. The pretext is not meant to withstand deep investigation. It just needs to be convincing enough during the interaction that the victim complies before thinking to verify. Attackers establish credibility by demonstrating knowledge they shouldn't have if they were external threats. The insider knowledge they use makes them seem legit. The implicit reasoning, if they know all this, they must actually be who they claim to be, but often a lot of that info came from public sources or previous reconnaissance. There's a relevant observation from the social psychologist Irving Goffman in his book, The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. He wrote, "When an individual plays a part, he implicitly requests his observers to take seriously the impression that is fostered before them. They are asked to believe that the character they see actually possesses the attributes he appears to possess." Goffman was describing how all social interaction involves performance and impression management. We present versions of ourselves designed to create specific impressions in others, and we generally accept others' self-presentation without rigorous verification. Social engineers exploit this social contract. They foster impressions through their communication, knowledge, and behavior, and we generally accept these performances as genuine because that's how social interaction normally works. Questioning someone's identity or legitimacy feels socially inappropriate. It suggests distrust and creates awkwardness. Sophisticated attackers build detailed profiles over time, rather than conducting quick, superficial research. They often monitor targets for weeks or months, noting patterns in activities, documenting social and professional networks, collecting examples of communication styles, identifying interests and concerns, and waiting for optimal moments to strike. This patience produces much more convincing attacks. And there are social media mining tools. Attackers use these specialized tools to automate reconnaissance from social media and public sources. Tools like Multigo, The Harvester, and ReconNG aggregate information from multiple sources, visualize relationships between people and organizations, identify connections and patterns, and export data for analyses. These tools dramatically reduce the time required for reconnaissance. For high-value targets, attackers might even conduct physical reconnaissance. They observe office buildings to understand badge systems and entry procedures, identify smoking areas or outdoor spaces where employees gather, note shift changes in periods of high traffic, observe which vendors regularly access the facility, and identify security weaknesses in physical access controls. This physical intelligence enables in-person social engineering attacks, like tailgating into secure areas, impersonating vendors or service providers, or engaging employees in conversations that extract information. People people are often a lot more likely to trust someone they're looking at directly versus on the phone or through email. Before launching their main attack, sophisticated social engineers often test their reconnaissance and pretext. They might make low-stakes contact to validate information, calling to verify email address correctness, sending a benign email to confirm it reaches the target, or asking simple questions that test whether their organizational knowledge is accurate. These tests provide feedback. If something in their pretext is wrong, they discover it during testing rather than the actual attack, and they refine their approach based on these responses. It's also very important to note that social engineering reconnaissance is not a one-time activity, it is an ongoing cycle. Initial reconnaissance identifies potential targets and approaches. First contact provides additional intelligence through victim responses. That intelligence informs subsequent contacts and requests. Each interaction reveals more information that makes future interactions more convincing. They might contact you multiple times over days or weeks, building a relationship and gradually increasing the sensitivity of their requests. Early interactions establish trust that later interactions exploit. Understanding how reconnaissance works should inform your approach to information sharing. You may choose to audit your social media privacy settings and consider what information you are making publicly available. Think carefully before posting about work projects, organizational changes, or travel plans. Be cautious about accepting connection requests from people you don't personally know. Understand that seemingly innocent information can be used to make social engineering attacks more convincing. Organizations should provide guidance on what information employees should and should not share publicly. They should be aware that public sources provide extensive intelligence to potential attackers. When someone contacts you with a request, evaluate their pretext critically. Does this request align with normal processes? Are they asking you to bypass standard procedures? Do they have knowledge they should have if they're who they claim to be? Or do they only have information available from public sources? Is there artificial urgency? Would this legitimately require immediate action? Can you verify their identity through independent channels? Legitimate contacts won't object to verification. They understand that security requires confirming identity. Attackers will resist verification because it would expose them. Be aware of organizational context that might make you a social engineering target. If your organization just announced a system migration, expect social engineering attempts related to that migration. If there's been a leadership change, expect attempts to impersonate the new leadership. If there's been a publicized security incident, expect attempts claiming to address that incident. Attackers strike when context makes their pretext most believable. Awareness of that context helps you maintain appropriate skepticism, even when requests seem to align with current events. In our next lesson, we'll explore phone-based social engineering attacks, how attackers use voice communication to create immediacy, build rapport, and apply psychological pressure that's even more effective than written communication. Phone calls create real-time interaction that doesn't give you the time to research, consult, or carefully consider your responses, which is exactly why attackers favor this approach.